From the Tisch WNET studios at Lincoln Center in New York, Megan Thompson.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us. Investigators in Virginia Beach are still searching for a motive for the mass murder of 12 people in a municipal office building on Friday. At a news conference today, police and city officials said government offices there will remain closed tomorrow. And they gave a detailed description of the 36 minutes from the time police were dispatched until the suspect was shot and captured. He later died at the hospital.
He's on the second floor.
I could tell you that in the police world, anything more than 3 to 5 shots is a long gun battle. That's what was happening. I can tell you that although I do not have the exact number of rounds that the perpetrator fired, it was well into the double digits.
The suspect shooting through a doorway on the second floor on the east side.
Officials say they do not believe the suspect targeted specific people, but they did reveal that the man, a 15-year municipal employee, had emailed his 2-week notice to resign the morning of the shooting.
To the extent that the subject's employment status has anything to do with these events, that will be part of the ongoing investigation. However, he was not terminated, and he was not in the process of being terminated.
The city of Virginia Beach will hold a memorial service on Thursday, and many residents plan to wear blue tomorrow to honor the victims. Mexican officials are in Washington, D.C., preparing for talks later this week with the Trump administration about threatened tariffs. President Trump said last week that he will impose a 5% tariff on Mexican goods starting June 10th unless Mexico stops migrants, mostly from Central American countries, from crossing into the U.S. Tariffs would increase 5% every month until they reach 25%. This morning, acting White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney said Mr. Trump is, quote, deadly serious about the tariffs and suggested Mexico stop the migrants at their southern border.
They can secure their southern border with Guatemala. And most of the people who are coming in through Mexico now are not Mexicans. They are from Guatemala and El Salvador, other countries south of Mexico. That border is only a quarter as long as the border with the United States.
We'll have more on the situation in Mexico and the tariff threat coming up later in the broadcast. Tensions between the United States and China rose on both economic and military fronts today. Speaking in Switzerland, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo urged countries doing business with China to exercise caution.
The United States welcomes China's participation in the global economy, as long as it plays by the rules. But we encourage our Swiss friends and partners to recognize that the security risks associated with many of China's economic activities, and we discussed that at some length today.
Pompeo made his comments on trade relations just as China began 2 days of military exercises in the South China Sea. China's defense minister told an annual security conference in Singapore today that Beijing will defend its claims over Taiwan and disputed parts of the South China Sea. Yesterday, United States Acting Secretary of Defense Patrick Shanahan told the gathering that Beijing's effort to set up outposts in the South China Sea are a, quote, toolkit of coercion. Learn about the life and legacy of the famed New Orleans chef known for feeding civil rights leaders. Visit pbs.org/newshour. For more on Mexico's reaction to the Trump tariff threat, Kevin Seif, Latin America correspondent for The Washington Post, joins us now via Skype from Mexico City. So I want to just rewind back a little bit. I mean, it's not like Mexico hasn't been doing anything on this issue. Can you just tell us a little bit about what that country has done over the last few years to stem the flow of migrants over its borders?
Yeah, I mean, for several years, Mexico has been deporting large numbers of Central Americans. Those deportations continue today. Over the last 4 months, Mexico has deported more than 40,000 Central Americans. And under the current president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, those policies have actually been sort of emboldened in a way, I think in large part in response to the threats that we've seen from the Trump administration.
This morning, Mick Mulvaney said that, the first thing that he wants to see is Mexico strengthening security at its border with Guatemala.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is that the Guatemala-Mexico border is incredibly porous, has always been incredibly porous. And so I know the U.S., especially in the last few days, has spoken about the need to secure the Guatemala-Mexico border. I mean, doing so would be a multi-year, multi-billion-dollar effort. As of now, there's very little infrastructure on that border.
Other things that have been mentioned are making Mexico a place where asylum seekers could apply for asylum there, or also cracking down on some of the smuggling and smugglers. What would those things look like?
The Trump administration basically, from the beginning, has proposed this idea: Central Americans who are on their way through Mexico to apply for asylum in the U.S. could instead apply for asylum in Mexico. I mean, there are a lot of problems with that proposal. One is that Mexico remains an enormously violent country. I mean, there are parts of Mexico that are as violent or more violent than the places that the migrants are fleeing in Central America. The other question is, what kind of social services could Mexico provide to asylum seekers? Is there enough funding here for asylum seekers to eat? Where would they live? There are a lot of questions about that. I would put security at the very top of that list, though.
The Trump administration also has plans to send DHS agents down to the Guatemala-Mexico border.
Because the Trump administration has been pressuring not just Mexico, but also Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador to stop migration, there are conversations happening with Mexico right now, and that mostly is about the threat of tariffs. But there are also parallel conversations being had with the Central American countries. So in Guatemala, what that has led to is this agreement between DHS and the government of Guatemala to allow dozens of DHS agents to basically support, advise, train Guatemalan officials to stop migration, to secure the country's northern border. These are agents that would mostly be there in a sort of advisory role. They wouldn't be patrolling the border necessarily. So it gives Guatemala the ability to say, like, listen, we are doing something. We are open to accepting your assistance. But in terms of what kind of a practical difference it's going to make, I mean, I don't think we're going to suddenly see a huge shift in the migration trends from Guatemala because of this. I mean, just a few weeks ago, President Trump directed the end of U.S. aid to Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador, right? So for a very long time, there was a consensus in the foreign policy establishment in the U.S. and pretty much everywhere in Latin America that U.S. assistance was something that could, in the long run, ultimately lead to a decrease in migration. Instead, the Trump administration's position has been, we're going to stop aid, we're going to increase tariffs as punishment. I mean, most people who study migration, most economists would tell you that probably is going to have the opposite impact on migration as the intended one, but we'll see.
All right, Kevin Seif of The Washington Post, thank you so much for joining us.
Sure.
If you've ever gone to the hospital and ended up with a big bill from a provider you didn't realize was out of your insurance network, chances are you got what's called a surprise medical bill. It's a big issue that's getting a lot of attention right now from policymakers on both sides of the aisle. Last month, President Trump even called for legislative action on the subject. This isn't a new issue. 3 years ago, PBS NewsHour Weekend reported on efforts in New Jersey to crack down on these surprise bills. Here are the stories of two patients. After suffering a heart attack 20 years ago, Lee Lehman of Hillsdale, New Jersey, does what he can to eat right and stay in shape. But the 64-year-old computer consultant still has occasional health scares. Last summer, doctors told him he needed a quintuple heart bypass. Before the procedure, he confirmed both the Valley Hospital in Ridgewood, New Jersey, and his surgeon accepted his Aetna health insurance, which he gets through his employer, a small consulting company.
But a few weeks later, after the surgery, I got a bill in the mail.
The surprise bill was for nearly $2,200. It was from a critical care doctor in the intensive care unit who did not accept Lehman's insurance.
Out of nowhere, somebody who you never heard of, I don't remember meeting, sends a bill. Why is he not accepting the insurance? Why is he out of network?
Lehman says he contacted the hospital and insurance company, but they told him there was nothing they could do to reduce the bill. So he dug into savings to pay it off.
It's a little stressful. You're trying to recover. It's major surgery. I mean, I felt like I was hit by a truck.
Something similar happened to Andrew Heyman, an accountant from Hackensack, New Jersey, who had health insurance through his employer, from Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield.
There was blood and glass all over this whole part of the parking lot.
2 years ago, when he was helping a neighbor move, a large glass table shattered, and a shard of glass sliced into Heyman's left ankle. An ambulance took Heyman to the closest emergency room at Hackensack University Medical Center, which he knew was in-network. His ankle wound was so deep the ER called the plastic surgeon on duty.
And he came in and sewed up my leg in probably about 10 minutes.
But that surgeon did not accept his insurance. Heyman received what's called a balance bill. The doctor charged close to $6,000. Blue Cross covered about $860, and Heyman was stuck owing $5,000.
I'm thinking, there's no way I'm going to pay this. This is insane. It's kind of almost like, whatever, if you want to call it false advertising, when you get some kind of a crazy bill from someone who's not in the network, and you really had no control over the fact that they would be there.
The hospital wouldn't discuss the specifics of Heyman's case, but said it recognizes the current system is not optimal. After 6 months of fighting his bill and appealing with his insurer, Heyman discovered his employer, a large education company, was supposed to cover the charge, and the company paid it off. For more on the steps lawmakers are taking to tackle surprise medical bills, I'm joined by Rachel Bluth, a reporter for Kaiser Health News. Rachel, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Megan.
I wanted to first start out by asking you how prevalent this is. I mean, after our story aired, I actually got a surprise medical bill. It was kind of a textbook case. I went to an ER and then got a bill for over $900 from a doctor who wasn't in my network. I wanted to just, ask you, I mean, how often does this happen?
They're really prevalent. Some studies say that up to 1 in 5 emergency room visits could result in a surprise bill, over $100,000 for a heart attack, $50,000 for an air ambulance ride. It's important to remember that even though this is something that happens a lot in emergency departments, it can happen in planned procedures as well. You pick a hospital that's in network, you pick a surgeon that's in network, and then you're seen by an anesthesiologist who doesn't take your insurance, and you're hit with a surprise bill.
Is this somehow getting worse, or is it happening more often these days?
I don't know if it's getting worse, but you're seeing a lot of high deductible plans nowadays where patients have a lot of upfront costs that they have to pay before their insurance really starts to kick in. So consumers might be a little bit more sensitive to it because they're having higher out-of-pocket costs these days and more of their costs that they have to pay themselves.
This seems like one of the very few issues that is actually gaining momentum in Washington these days that lawmakers on both sides of the aisle are actually cooperating on. Tell us, what's going on down there?
There's a ton of bipartisan support to fix this problem. President Trump has said that he wants to tackle surprise medical billing. There are proposals in the House. There's proposals in the Senate. There's been a number of congressional hearings about it in the past few months. So there's definitely a lot of momentum going forward.
I mean, how likely is it that everybody's going to be able to come to the table and come to an agreement on all this?
That's the million-dollar question. So despite the fact that Republicans and Democrats, Congress, and the president are all working together on this, there's still a lot of competing incentives in the healthcare industry. Doctors and hospitals are a little bit nervous about this idea of rate setting. They're worried that they're not going to be reimbursed at a high enough rate to compensate for their services. Insurance companies aren't thrilled with the idea of arbitration because they're worried it could lead to higher medical costs down the line. It could cause some inflation in the industry. So everyone is trying to get on board and get on the same page right now. Plus, we're dealing with a kind of cramped legislative calendar. There's a lot of other stuff that has to happen this summer. They have to fund the government, raise the debt ceiling. A presidential election season is about to start up. So all of these things are possibly impediments or hurdles that could maybe slow down some of the bipartisan momentum. But that being said, Senator Lamar Alexander, who is the chair of one of the health policy-making committees in the Senate, he said that he has a proposal and he wants it on the floor to be voted on by July and hopefully get to the president.
Great. Rachel Bluth from Kaiser Health News. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks, Megan.
Between flushing the toilet, bathing, and washing dishes, the average person in the United States generates almost 100 gallons of wastewater each day. And dealing with that water requires a lot of resources. In fact, treating water, including sewage, accounts for 3 to 4% of all the energy used in the United States. But imagine if that water, even sewage, could itself be used to help generate energy. We're going to take you inside a utility plant in suburban Chicago that's doing just that. It's generating all the power it needs to run, just using the waste that it collects. It's a model that could dramatically reduce the amount of energy used to treat wastewater around the country. Christopher Booker has the story.
This is their grease trap from all the kitchen waste.
Outside a sports bar in the Chicago suburbs, Joe Quinones is taking me through his routine.
Everything that comes from the sinks and the floor drains, sometimes dishwashers, they all come in here, and then it separates the grease so it doesn't go into the city sewer.
He works for a company that specializes in collecting fats, oils, and greases, known collectively by the acronym FOG. On this brisk morning, he starts by breaking up the grease, which hardens at the surface.
It's a dirty job, but it doesn't mean the restaurant is.
He then connects the hose to the truck and starts to suck up the fog. On this visit, Quinones collects about 1,200 gallons of it. From the restaurant, it's about a 15-mile drive to a wastewater treatment facility in the western suburb of Downers Grove. Here, Quinones deposits the truck's contents into an underground tank, minus some solid waste that gets caught by the grates. Quinones' company pays 5 cents a gallon to dump this material here. But it's not just waste to Downers Grove. It's a key ingredient in making this plant net zero, meaning it generates all of the energy it needs to run. But to understand how this grease supercharges the energy production on site, we need to take a step back to see what this plant does and how it uses power. It's a process that starts 40 feet below the ground. Our guide is Nick Meninga, the general manager of the Downers Grove Sanitary District.
That's correct. All the sewage is flowing from town by gravity into a big box on the other side of this wall.
Gravity provides all the power necessary to get the sewage here, but to treat it, you need to get it back to the surface.
This is one of the big energy uses in the plant, and there's really no getting around having to pump this water.
Almost 50-year-old pumps send an average of 11 million gallons of sewage each day back up to the ground level.
So this is where the water is actually coming up?
Yeah, it comes up here.
From here, the plant continues the process, separating the water from the semi-solid waste, known as sludge.
The sewage simply flows in these tanks, and anything that settles to the bottom, we're able to remove as sludge.
But to fully remove the sludge from this water takes some more energy.
It gets less smelly the farther we go.
This is the aeration tank, where air is injected to help further clean the wastewater.
We're not making it drinking water, we're making it river water. But the water that we make, it supports the aquatic community that we have in the local streams.
Over the last decade, the plant has reduced its energy use by about 30%. It's done this partly by investing in more efficient equipment.
These brand new technology high-speed turbo blowers are saving us quite a bit of energy compared to the old technology, but they still remain the largest energy user in the facility.
You keep the old blowers as a redundancy?
That's correct. We use these as backup. Obviously, we have to have redundancy everywhere because people flush their toilets whether we're ready or not. We have to always be ready.
This plant is one of just a few in the country where all of the energy it uses is generated by the waste collected on site. That starts with the sludge, the solid waste collected throughout the process. It's deposited in an oxygen-free or anaerobic chamber called a digester. In this environment, microorganisms eat at the sludge and naturally emit biogas. It's a fuel that many wastewater plants capture for heating, usually burning off any excess. But here at Downers Grove, the digesters are also fed a special ingredient. Remember that fog? The fat, oil, and grease that is deposited at the plant? It's instrumental in this plant generating enough energy to power itself. When it's added to the digester mix, the chemical reaction turbocharges the biogas production.
How did the decision to take in this grease impact the amount of energy you're able to produce here?
We've actually been able to double our gas production and as a result double our electricity production as well by taking fog and adding it and co-digesting it with our sludge.
So by taking that grease from these restaurants, you're able to double your output?
That's correct. Double the output.
Transforming that biogas into usable power required a significant investment. The utility purchased equipment to clean and purify the biogas, and it bought 2 generators, about $600,000 in total, which turn the gas into electricity that the plant can use.
The electricity is monitored continuously.
At the plant's control center, Meninga showed us how energy usage fluctuates throughout the day. He says the investments to become net zero have dramatically reduced costs.
The energy cost used to be over $500,000 a year, but now we're down to about $50,000 a year just to maintain that connectivity with the utility. And then by taking the high-strength waste from the haulers, we're able to generate about $300,000 a year in revenue. So the swing is pretty dramatic for us. It's over 10% of our operating cost.
Meninga says those savings haven't reduced the overall amount that customers pay, but that bills haven't gone up as much as they would have. While there have been months when equipment maintenance or heavy usage required more grid power, the plant has met or exceeded its goal of being energy neutral 9 of the last 16 months.
So this is the digester control room.
Meninga says this model could significantly reduce the amount of energy used by water utilities around the country.
The water energy nexus is a pretty important piece of the energy puzzle. There's just no reason for a community to use a bunch of energy to treat their wastewater when they can be actually converting their wastewater treatment facility into a power generating station.
Coming up this week, NewsHour will have complete coverage of President Trump's state visit to the United Kingdom beginning tomorrow and coverage of ceremonies marking the 75th anniversary of D-Day later in the week. That's all for this edition of PBS NewsHour Weekend. I'm Megan Thompson. Have a good night.
PBS NewsHour Weekend is made possible by Bernard and Irene Schwartz, Sue and Edgar Wackenheim III, Seton Melvin, the Cheryl and Philip Milstein family, Dr. P. Roy Vagelos and Diana T. Vagelos, the JPB Foundation, Rosalind P. Walter, Barbara Hope Zuckerberg. Corporate funding is provided by Mutual of America, designing customized individual and group retirement products. That's why we're your retirement company. Additional support has been provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Be more.